I was processed in around 12 hours or less than 12 hours from military to civilian and turned loose.
You mean within 12 hours of coming home from South Vietnam,
Yes,
you were processed out
yes.
within 12 hours?
I landed in the States in McGuire Air Base in
Yeah,
New Jersey, which is adjacent to Fort Dix, where I started,
right.
and where I was processed. I arrived there around 9 o'clock or so at night on the 29th of November, 1968. I was processed throughout the night, through the early morning, and by 9 a.m., I was standing on a sidewalk in military clothes, but not a soldier, a civilian,
That is
not
just
a civilian. And
mind-boggling.
I mentioned,
Yeah.
I mentioned it in my book, how this was, after all that I had been through and whatnot, this was probably the darkest moment of my life. And I was turned loose in my dress uniform without an overcoat.
Mm.
I was cold December 1st, November 30th, rather, in New Jersey. I was cold. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept for, who knows, 24, 48 hours, not really slept, at least that. And I'm without a weapon,
Mhm.
you know, which sounds kind of ridiculous. I didn't need it. However, I had slept with it for the last 12 months, and been in the military for the past 2.5+ years. And now I'm like a man without a country.
You say for the past 3 years, I had been either intensely training or fighting for my life in South Vietnam, or fighting in a top secret war across the fence in Laos and North Vietnam. Now I was neither a soldier nor civilian, and my head was swirling. I wasn't sure what I was. And so then you're married within 2 months, and then within a year of that, your wife has a baby, and so now you've got a child to focus on. You have a marriage to focus on. But over that first year, that second year, how does that go? You've got these things to focus on. You do have to get on with your life, but the Vietnam War is still going. The fall of Saigon is still, what,
Right.
6 years away,
Yeah.
Um, and you've experienced just, I mean, some of the most intense, relentless combat that folks are going to experience in the Vietnam War. So how does that go for you over the, 69, 70, 71? How does the fall of Saigon in April 75, how does all that strike you? How are you, sort of managing all this as you're getting on with your life?
Yeah. It was very, very difficult for me. The environment, the general public environment was very negative. It was very adverse to Vietnam vets. Um, so it wasn't like, welcome home. I've realized very quickly that it would be best if people I met, new acquaintances, knew nothing about my my experience, let alone my experience of being in the military, let alone my combat. Well, a lot of my combat I couldn't disclose anyway. I mean, I was under a 20-year non-disclosure. Like I say, other than a few close friends and family, there was no welcome. It was not a good time to be an ex-military guy. absolutely not. I mean, there was a lot of criticism, and I found myself on many occasions taking a deep breath, biting my tongue, and not fall into the trap of being accused of being the typical psychotic, you know, combat vet.
You mentioned the woman who, I forget who it was, but somebody who saw Apocalypse Now and then,
Yes.
and then made some comment to you about
This
that.
is years later. This is 11 years or so after I returned. And this was one of the few people in this company I was working for, one of the few people that knew my background because she was a human resource manager. She was also one of the sisters, I mean, also a sister of one of the owners. And one Monday morning, she came out to see me and said that, hey, I saw Apocalypse Now over the weekend. And I said, oh, that's good. And she looked me straight in the face with a straight face and with an appearance of awe. She said, I never realized that all of you Vietnam vets were either drug addicts or psychopaths. and, and I'm thinking, you stupid,
Wow.
you ignorant.
What was your response?
Again, I'm fighting back the anger to just launch into a tirade, but that fits the mold,
Right.
you know.
Almost as if she's setting you up.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think she was setting me up. I mean, this was just ignorance, just pure ignorance. And I'm thinking to myself, so where do you put me in those two categories? And I looked at her and I said, Joan, that's what you think, then what can I say?
Do you have any idea? I mean, perhaps you have a definite number, but at least a ballpark number of how many combat situations you were in over your tour in Vietnam?
No,
And
I was there.
many dozens, right?
Oh, many, many dozens,
Yeah.
hundreds, I would say, because there were some days that there were multiple multiple firefights. And being on a Huey gunship, your only job, the only reason you're called, the only reason you're there is to fight, not to
Right.
not to transport somebody, not to bring supplies. When you're called, it's because you're going into a fight. I mean, of course, there are the occasional convoy escort. There are medevac escorts, which very often ended up in a firefight. But and then of course there were people sniffer missions, which sometimes ended up in a firefight, sometimes not. But other than that, I mean, we were the hired guns, if you will. Our sole purpose was to get into a firefight. I mean, that was it.
A phrase you often use in the memoir that I'd love to hear you describe or explain. You say you're in your M60, you're a crew chief aboard this Huey gunship. You've got your M60. As you just said, you're there to fight. That's the primary reason for being for this ship and for you being on it. And you use the phrase that you're out on the skids. What does that mean when you say you're out on the skids of the helo?
I mean, what I would do and my crew, my partner, the way we operated was, I mean, we realized right in the very beginning that there's not a place to hide in a gunship, in a Huey gun. I mean, if you stay inside the aircraft because you think you're protected more, I mean, that's just That's just ridiculous because you're not.
Hmm.
There's no armor on the aircraft. The only armor is there's armor around the pilot seat and the co-pilot seat. And we wore some body armor, some limited body armor for the chest and the back. Um, but you could put your fist basically through the side of a helicopter. So going out in a skid when we're in a firefight, going out in a skid would mean going outside the helicopter, standing on the skids with my M60 and firing and fighting from that position.
You're
I mean, yeah,
standing on the skid
fully,
now.
yeah,
So now, presumably, you've got a strap or something
we
holding
do.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, we call it a monkey strap. It's basically a seat belt that you could adjust the length. Is like a tail, a seat belt with a tail on it with a tether. And we would leave that as loose as possible so that we could get out and we'd have full mobility out on the skid. Again, the more aggressive, my belief was the more aggressive you could be in a firefight, the better the chances of survival. If you hesitate or pull back in any stretch, you're not going to survive. Your chances of survival are going to decrease tremendously. So the best way is to be the more aggressive in a firefight. And because again, hiding inside the helicopter and shooting from there, while that's fine, you have limited visibility, you have limited mobility, and you're not protected. You're not, it's not going to protect you.
So you're standing on a skid, and you're hundreds of missions, you say. So
Yeah.
things are going to vary, but on average, how high up would the helo be when you're shooting the M60?
Oh, it could vary from treetop to several hundred feet to a few hundred feet. I mean, we didn't operate from a high altitude like a Cobra. A Cobra gunship operated from almost a vertical attack, from
Right.
high altitude coming down. No, we didn't operate that way.
So
Um,
you're standing on a skid that's, a couple inches across. You have a belt that's got you, attached to the Huey. Um, but presumably when you're a few hundred feet up, you can see down. And I think most people have a natural inclination to say, I don't want to be even if with a belt, I don't want to be standing on something this narrow, a couple hundred feet up. Not only that, but you've got the tracers coming up at you. They're
right,
shooting all around. You describe in your memoir instances where the helos are just shot up and you're just mystified. How was it that I wasn't hit?
right.
So the question is, as you reflect back on yourself, perhaps maybe it would be easier to reflect on those you served with in these intense missions. Um, what what traits are required for a person not only to do this job, but to do it well and to do it again and again and again and again? I think there are a lot of really good soldiers out there who would say, that's taking it too far. I can't do that. What are the traits that it takes to do these kinds of operations?
Well, I think speaking for myself, and I know my fellow crew members would say the same thing. For one thing, we had a job to do. And if we weren't willing to put it all on the line when called, when doing our job, then we don't belong there. Then we should be doing something else.
Mhm.
Because you can't do it half-heartedly. You can't do it, but I'll give a little. And no, that's not it. You for one thing, you may not survive with that kind of an attitude. But if you're not willing to put your safety aside then you're not going to be any good in saving your fellow soldiers. We're there to protect. And
Mm.
if you're not willing to do that, to do what it takes to do that, then you don't belong. You don't belong there. So, I mean, that's the reason. It may sound, and others, people that I've worked with from special forces that are on the ground, have told me many, many times, you're just nuts for doing that. It's just crazy. And I would tell them, wait a minute, you had a job to do. You went in under these most adverse conditions. We put you in. You were there for however many days, and you completed your job. You did your job. Now it's our job to get you out.
Good
How could we
shot.
not? How could we not do our job? I mean, how could we turn our backs on our brothers that our whole purpose in life is to protect and to do what we needed to do, what we were supposed to do when it was our turn to do it.
So
So,
if I'm hearing you, then so you come back from a day of 1 or 2 or 3 intense missions, you know that it's likely to be the same tomorrow. And, to the extent that you're ruminating at all, and, a lot of guys in the world of war say you don't have time for thinking, you just, except for what's right in front of you. But suppose, you do have some time to think about it. You're not thinking about, man, I'm collecting some wild stories that once my 20-year non-disclosure thing is over, then I can talk about it. You're thinking about, there are guys out there in Laos and North Vietnam who are going to need to get extracted.
yep,
And there aren't very many people who are going to do that. And
right,
I'm one of those few. And so that's what I'm going to do. And if that means getting out on the skids 400 feet up with an M60, seeing the tracers coming up, as you often describe in what you've written, you can feel vibrations. Apparently you developed a skill of, you could feel vibrations, and by the strength of the vibration, you could tell how badly the helo was hit. And yet just keeping at that is but what's motivating you is not the pursuit of glory, but it's the pursuit of getting these guys out of Laos and North Vietnam
right,
as quickly and as safely as possible.
right, right. I mean, that was it. I mean, that was our job. It was a job to do, a job to do. We were very good at it. We were very successful at it. And a lot of that success, as I mentioned earlier, came with aggression because we were always outgunned. I mean, there was no comparison. So, I mean, how do you survive? How do you become successful in a situation where you're massively outgunned? Well, the only chance you have is to be more aggressive. And
Yeah.
instead of turning tail and running, you just keep pounding, you just keep attacking, and that was successful. We felt and believed we were good at what we did. And the other thing is our reliance on each other in the aircraft and our wingship, our confidence in each other made the difference. There's no way I would go out on the skid if I didn't have total confidence in my pilot and co-pilot, because if they would panic and jerk the cyclic and change a quick change of direction, they would, I would have gotten thrown in front of the miniguns, even though I was on a strap. I mean, the miniguns were only a foot away.
Wow.
The rockets, the 2 3/4 inch rockets were right next to our legs. If I moved my legs, 6 inches out, they would have been ripped off by the rockets, the firing of the rockets. So having confidence in your team, your crew, it makes all the difference. You can't have any weak link. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to survive. So having the confidence in each other, um, that's what makes the difference.
Combat vets often say that, war is awful and it sticks with you in hard ways. You describe that what you've written, the nightmares and things. They often say though that there's something about it that you miss, however horrible it was. And
Right,
you're describing this very tight bond of this crew aboard this Huey. You have absolute trust in in those who are on the gunship with you. They have absolute trust in you. As your life has gone by over these decades since Vietnam, is that something that that you have missed about that experience in Vietnam, that intense bond,
there is.
that intense sense of trust and loyalty that you gave them, that they gave you in return?
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's something that is different from any experience you could have during your life. I mean, it's very, very different. You bond with people very quickly in a bond that it's beyond, simple description. I mean, it is, your life is in their hands, their life is in your hands. Um, and you do that over and over and over. So yeah, I mean that's something that you can't replace, or you can't experience. It's very different, and combat itself is very different. It could, people have asked me, aside from the attachment and connection to your fellow operators, what was it, what else, I mean, drew you back? Did anything else? And the answer is yeah, there's kind of a weird, it's almost like an obscene drug, uh,
Mhm.
combat.
The adrenaline.
Yeah. And when you're in a fight for your life and your adrenaline is cranking, the feeling that you get when you're successful is euphoric. I mean, it's we were outnumbered, we were overpowered, and we beat them. We were, we come out with the upper hand.
Wow.
And that aspect can be addictive. You know, um, the adrenaline, as it starts to wear off, you know, after the combat and after you remove from the situation, then you start feeling the exhaustion. Then you start thinking of of what was going on, what might have happened, what you could have done differently, and also the fear. That's when the reality and the fear kind of starts to set in.
Kicks in later.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not. I mean, I think I described it in the book that there on many occasions I was anticipating and starting to feel some fear going in to the mission. Once the mission actually kicked in on site, I mean that is just like poof, I mean that's just gone. You're just so hyper focused
Mm.
on what you need to do, very, very often. And I think in most cases, things were almost like slow motion. I
Right.
mean, it was almost like in a slow motion time change type of thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to it, and there's a lot of reasons why people do it over and over. The same holds true for the guys that were on the ground that we were inserting, and they've told me, they've described their feelings. And I mean, we were doing two different things, and yet on a feeling level, that were exactly the same.
That intensity. So describe briefly what the basic mission was. When you go to South Vietnam, I don't think you know that you're going to be working with special forces in
No,
Laos and North Vietnam. I don't think you know that when you arrive in South Vietnam, that this is, where you're
no,
going to head to this,
no, we didn't.
to this secret war across the fence in Laos and North Vietnam. Um, what basically was that mission? We've kind of touched on it, but what basically was that mission related 1968, related to Laos and North Vietnam for you?
Well, that didn't start right away. That was slowly came into the mix. Our basic mission with the 101st Airborne in 1967 when we arrived, and in 60, and it stayed throughout 68, but at a lesser level. Our mission was supporting ground troops of the 101st Airborne, and other military personnel, other units around the area of Ben Hoa and then Song Bay region. And we slowly started, and we were, again, as hired guns, we were called whenever a firefight broke out in a particular area that we would be covering. So it could be supporting U.S. ground troops. It could be supporting, we worked with Korean ground troops. We worked with the Aussies and the New Zealanders. Yeah. Which was very, very interesting. Tremendous soldiers. As I say, we worked with the Arvins, which is, a little different in a lot of ways. But then we started slowly working with special forces, and that started within the first couple months we were down there. And I don't think any of us had a clue of what it was going to lead to. We ran a few missions for special forces into Cambodia, which were part of this MACVSOG, the special operation, but we didn't really know it at the time. I mean, on the briefing, pre-mission briefing, we were told we're going to be running across the fence a short distance. Do you have a problem with that? And of course, no. I mean, a job's a job. It didn't matter. So we started with them, but our primary missions at that time was supporting the 101st and other ground units in the region.
So you've got some helos then that are taking, so we're focusing now on the missions into Laos and North Vietnam. You've got helos that are taking these special forces guys in, dropping them off, and then you're there as a gunship to provide cover and defense,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then you go back in at some other date when it's time for those guys in Laos and North Vietnam to be picked up. You go in again, once again, providing cover.
Right.
And you describe a number of cases where these special forces just have NVA swarming them, and you guys go in and take them on. You've mentioned that as you get into this situation now where you're just doing one operation after another with these special forces in Laos and Cambodia. You mentioned earlier that you had to sign a 20-year non-disclosure agreement, that you would not talk about that. What else did they tell you? For example, if your gunship is shot down in North Vietnam and you don't come out, then what is the government going to say about that?
They're going to deny that we were told that if we get shot down in Laos or North Vietnam, if we get shot down, all possible attempts will be made to get us out right away. However, if they can't get us out, our government is going to deny that we were operating officially under the government, that we were basically running rogue and that we would not be protected under Geneva Convention, which the North Vietnamese didn't follow anyway. However,
Right, sure.
yeah, but we would be viewed as spies by the North Vietnamese, and our government would deny any connection that we were official, that we were just operating on our own as a rogue outfit, a rogue unit, and that would be it.
How old were you when this was going on?
1968, I was 22.
22. Now, what was it that when this opportunity arises and it's fully, no one orders you to do this, you have a choice, right? And
Right,
they
right,
say,
totally
"No,
volunteer.
if you don't want to do this, fine. But here are the parameters. What was it that made you say, yeah, sure, I'll go for it?
Well, I think for us, it was the fact that we were very confident in what we did. We knew clearly that these guys needed help. They needed someone that they can count on that could get them out. And we believed that we could fill that gap. They were having, at least at this time, they were having mixed success. And they thought, they being the SF soldiers and officers, they thought that their mixed success was just the way it was, that this was normal. And we didn't see it that way. And we experienced some of that very quickly, where other gunships that were working with them pulled away.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. And so you described that word. Gunships
And
break contact and leave the guys sort of
right,
almost defenseless on the ground.
basically defenseless. And when we asked the question before we formally signed on, and when the question was asked, how many teams have been left behind? And Colonel Barr, who was the commander of FOB-1 at that time, he hesitated for a moment, and he just shook his head and said, too many. And we made a pact with them, with FOB-1 at the time, saying that if we do things our way, meaning we only work with gunships from the Black Angels, from the 101st Airborne, when needed extra, when we needed a heavy fire. A light fire team is 2 gunships, which is most of the time which we did. But on occasion, it would require a heavy fire team, which would be 4 gunships. And that's when we ran into a problem with these others that were working with the SF. And we said, if you go along with that, with our request, then we will never leave a team behind. We will not. We will do whatever it takes, whatever the cost. We will not leave a team behind. And we meant it. And we lived by that. And we never did. We never abandoned the team.
Now, these SF forces in Laos, North Vietnam, are they primarily doing sort of long-range reconnaissance patrol kind of stuff, or what sort of missions are these guys doing out there?
They did varying missions, various missions. They did wiretapping. They did
On the trail, for example.
on the trail. Yeah, they did wiretapping. They did locating of truck parks, that sort of thing, ammunition supply areas, POW capturing, snatching.
Right. Yeah.
And also They did a lot of harassment, hit and run harassment. That wasn't the main mission because again, once you make contact, you have 5 people or 7 people on the ground, and all of a sudden you have hundreds of North Vietnamese. So making contact was primarily trying to avoid, but which was very difficult. So there were various missions. They had a mission called Eldest Son, which planted booby-trapped ammunition to the North Vietnamese, AK-47 ammunition that had been modified, mortar rounds that had been modified, and various.
Trap them, tinker with them so that they'll explode in the face of the NBA, that sort of thing.
Right. And the whole concept behind that was a bigger picture, was to plant the seed that the ammunition that they were getting from China was of poor quality.
I see. Okay.
And to distrust, the ammo that they had, not to have confidence. And it worked. It worked. I mean, years later, they found out from North Vietnamese records how effective that was, because
Oh, really?
there was no trace. They were very good at making this ammo.
They're defective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was missions also.
And how long would these forces generally be on the ground? So they get dropped off,
Yep.
then they get extracted. Generally, how long?
Typically, there were 2 to 3, 4 days, usually the maximum for the small teams, and that was it. Occasionally, it would go longer, not by plan, but by situations. A lot of missions never made it through a day. A lot of missions where the team was compromised within the first couple hours. And that was always a very, very dangerous situation, because we would leave the team once they gave an okay, all clear on the ground, and we would have to head back to base, to either Quezon or Mylock or FOB1, whatever the case may be. And if they got ambushed or detected during that time period, it would take us time to get back to refuel and then return on site. So there was a time period that they were really extremely vulnerable. That was a very, very dangerous time for the teams on the ground. Those first couple hours, that was extremely dangerous.
So I want to come back and ask you, you were in so many missions, but if you were, restricted to talking about one, what would that one mission be? I want to come back to that, but I want to go, before we do that, earlier, in your time in South Vietnam, and one of the missions that you were part of was the People Sniffer missions, which I think gets us into this insight you had, that something was gathering before Tet, right? If I remember right.
Right.
But what were these People Sniffer missions?
The People Sniffer mission was, there was a machine, an apparatus that would be mounted in a UE slick, a troop carrier slick. And this apparatus would pick up like affluent from urine, from sweat, and basically it could be animal or human. So, I mean, it couldn't distinguish between a group of monkeys that are, in an area, which were all over. But anyway, the aircraft with the People Sniffer aboard would fly fairly slow at treetop level, and would fly a grid, would work a particular grid. that was established before, prior to heading out. And they would fly, let's just say north to south on a grid pattern, and
Yeah.
then east to west on a grid pattern. And as they're flying along, they would, if the machine reacted to picking up some scent, they would call out hotspot. And then the aircraft flying above, monitoring, would mark the map. We were doing the same thing. We didn't need to. That wasn't part of the requirement, but we did the same thing in our aircraft, so that our thought was that if something breaks out, we know exactly. We've got the spot. And it would record that mission, and then they would use that map to send ground troops in to investigate, to see if there were troops there, enemy troops.
So the idea is, maybe the VC were moving along and they stopped, and while they stopped, 10 of them
Yeah,
took a leak, and then this
yeah,
machine will.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
remarkable. Now
yeah.
you,
It is. I mean, like I say, it wasn't 100%, but it was still, it was better than nothing, because I mean, you're talking about, double and triple canopy where you cannot see the ground,
no,
uh,
yeah.
when you're flying over. So, yeah, leading up to Tet, a few days in the week leading up to Tet, we were out on a people sniffer mission, and just as soon as the machine was turned on, we're getting hotspot, hotspot, hotspot. I mean, just one after another. And so, naturally they thought something might be wrong with the machine and might be, need to be calibrated or whatever. So we returned to Sambay, to the airfield. They swapped out the machine. They had another one. They swapped it out. We went back out. The same thing happened. And we covered a large geographical area on this mission, and it was just saturated. I mean, looking at the map, I mean, it was just dotted. The whole thing was dotted. So we knew something was definitely going on. And prior to this, we were also noticing that the ground troops would engage with enemy forces, but it would be almost by chance, and poof, they wouldn't fight at all. The NVA or the enemy, so they wouldn't fight at all. They pull back quick, real quick. In most cases, it would be before we could even get there. I mean, they would not make contact, and this was happening all around the area, which was really, really odd, because we never experienced that. I mean, whenever contact was made, it may go on for an hour, a firefight, or maybe longer, and then they would pull back. But this is weird. This was it was almost like the Americans would initiate the contact, and they wouldn't fight back. They would disappear. So this is really weird. I mean, the whole area was feeling very, very unstable and uncomfortable. So, and yeah,
Wow.
and it turned out that, they were preparing, and we were so close in that Sambay area. We were so close to the Cambodian border that they were able to infiltrate, just freely infiltrate into the region.
So when Tet hits, then, had you resolved in your mind, you knew that something was going on.
Mhm.
When Tet hits, then all of a sudden it's clear
Yeah.
what had happened.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was clear. I mean, we knew something was up. We knew something was happening.
A lot of guys who fought through Tet remember that as, kind of the most intense part of their tour. Given what's to come for you, I wonder, is that true? I mean, as you look back on your year in Vietnam,
Not for me, no.
yeah, where does Tet fit?
No.
Yeah,
I mean, I, the surprise, yeah, that was probably maybe the biggest surprise, but the intensity, nowhere's near. It's not even, it's not even in the top 10.
Right.
I mean, for me. We had a team that we put in Laos. We put them in 7 days prior. It was supposed to have been a 2 to 3 day operation. The bad weather of September with the monsoons moved in. And to make a long story short, that 2 or 3 day mission ended up 7 days long. And these guys were physically exhausted. On the 7th day, when the weather finally cleared, that we could make it out there, we headed out to pick them up, and they were detected during the time that they were headed to the pickup point, to the landing zone. They had become detected. Now, they avoided trackers, professional trackers. They had avoided dogs. They had avoided large groups of NBA trying to find them. For days, they had been hunting these guys down. And now, when we're on our way to pick them up, they'd been detected and the race was on. When we got into the region of where they were, we could see North Vietnamese soldiers massing, moving in the direction of the landing zone. And by the hundreds. I mean, this was just a massive assault on the team.
So you could see them. You've got a team of what, 7 guys or something like that?
Yeah.
And then you can see
We're
hundreds
actually, yeah, right. And we could, yes. Now, they weren't real close to the team, these first group that we saw. And I took the opportunity to open fire on them, as did my partner, our door gunner, Scott. And these NVA were so focused and so well disciplined, they didn't even shoot back. I mean, they were on a full run. And we could see them, the ground in this particular area was sparsely vegetated. So it was a lot of almost field-like. And we could just see this massive soldiers of these tan uniforms headed in the direction where the team was. The team made it to the pickup point, to the extraction point, the landing zone, and they're in a full fight for their life. They are basically surrounded. When we went to pick them up, we went in with we made a pass without the slick, without the pickup helicopter. We made a pass just to see what the intensity, where most of it was coming from. And we found it all right. And we took several hits in the process. So we circled around and we picked up the slick. It was a Huey slick that was going to pick up the team. The team is fighting full blast. I mean, it was hard to hear even over the radios of communication because there was so much gunfire going on. And we guided the slick in, and the slick got to be about 15 feet off of the team, away from the team, was taking gunfire and panicked and pulled away without picking up the team. We couldn't believe this because, we're taking hits and now we're going to have to do it again. We should have got the team out on that first attempt, but the pilot was new to special operations missions. He panicked And so we circled around, and our pilot called the slick pilot and said, "What the hell just happened?" And he said, I couldn't go in. I can't go in. I'll get shot down. And on the ground, the team leader on the ground that had the radio, he's monitoring what's going on. And he called back and said, "If you don't get us out now, we're never coming out." And which was a fact. I mean, they would have been annihilated in minutes. And our pilot told the slick pilot, he said, "If you don't go in, I'll shoot you down myself." And to this day, I believe he meant it. I mean, that's how we were. I mean, this is our team down there. We can't pick them up. You know, we're too heavy loaded with weapons and stuff. And so our pilot told the slick pilot, he said, "Listen, we're going to slow down on our gun run. We're going to put ourselves between you and the heaviest of gunfire coming in. There's still going to be some coming from the opposite side, but we're gonna guide you in all the way, and at a slow, you know, when you slow down, we're going to slow down." And he said, "We're going to get the team." So the pilot said, "Okay, all right." So we guide them in. We're slowing down. We're getting ripped to shreds. We are taking so many hits. It was just unbelievable. At one point, I took a hit to the helmet. I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I was on the skids shooting. It seemed like my M60 was firing in slow motion compared to what was coming at us. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And we're getting ripped apart, ripped apart. I mean, I can hear alarms going off. Our aircraft is starting to shake something violently, and they got the team out. Got the team out. However, the slick did get shot down. We followed it. He called a mayday. We followed it, trying to protect it while we are losing power at the same time. And the slick crashed, a soft crash. It wasn't a hard crash, in an area that was about 400 yards or so, 400 yards away from this huge clearing. And in this clearing, there were multiple longhouses, North Vietnamese longhouses, which were like headquarters and barracks area.
Crashed right where the NVA are housed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he didn't have a heck of a lot of opportunities, you know. But so when we saw that, we're losing power. We're shaking like crazy. I can smell fuel. I can smell hydraulic fluid. I knew, I mean, we were in serious trouble. So what we did, we emptied everything we had into the longhouses. We just shot up the longhouses with our rockets and our machine guns and our 40 millimeter nose cannon. And the buildings are exploding. It looked like ants coming out of an anthill. And we were dropping a lot of NVA, a lot. Right up until the time we crashed. We crashed in through a bamboo thicket, which helped soften our crash. Before we crashed, the Covey pilot, who was conducting the operation, called us and said, "Herr Lead, you're on fire." Our call sign on that day was Hare. Well, it often was Hare, Hare, like rabbit, Hare. He said, "Herr Lead, you're on fire." And I leaned out and looked back at the cowling, the engine cowling, and sure enough, we're on fire. I mean, there's flames coming out. And so we crashed. I was knocked unconscious for a few moments. I was hurting all over. I had a full body ache going. And that's when I realized, or just before we crashed, I realized that I had gotten shot in the helmet, took a shot, an AK-47 round. That's what snapped my neck back. But we were all alive. I got out of the helicopter and I was looked at it, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I mean, it was not a spot in that helicopter that wasn't full of holes. The cockpit where I was in, I mean, there was not a space more than, a foot or so that didn't have a bullet hole in it. Through the back of the compartment, through the ceiling, through the floor, everything. And that's when I wondered, how the hell, how did I not get shot? And I don't know. And my partner, Scott, I mean, it was the same situation. I had a St. Christopher medal that I wore. I found the medal on the floor when I went to grab my M60. I saw my medal, the chain was nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be found. But I grabbed my St. Christopher medal, my watch. I had a Seiko watch with a metal band. It had snapped off and it was on the floor. So I grabbed that and shoved it in my pocket. And we went into our normal operating procedure, a standard operating procedure, which we had practiced many times, reviewed. And that was that the pilot, he would collect the maps, any documents that were in the aircraft that were of any use whatsoever. He would grab those and get out of the helicopter. The gunner, Scott, my gunner, he would go into the side compartment. There was a small side compartment on his side of the aircraft on the outside. He would get, there's a survival kit that was in there. He would grab that. That survival kit had a woodsman hatchet in it. It had various medical supplies, just minimal stuff, and some things just to survive, for basic survival. He would get that. I would go in from the co-pilot, the left side of the aircraft, which I was on, and zero out all the radios, just zero out all the frequencies, all the knobs, zero them out. Then open up the avionics compartment in front of the aircraft and just shoot up the avionics and the radios and all that stuff. So we did that, and we could hear the NVA.
You hear them
coming for us. There was a 50 caliber NVA heavy machine gun that was firing in our direction, and the tracers were going overhead. They didn't know precisely where we were. They knew where we were, basically. And so Scott and I were set up a small perimeter. We were firing our M60s in the direction of the NVA. We couldn't see them yet, but we could hear the impact of our shooting.
Meaning NVA soldiers who are hit.
Yeah, NVA soldiers crying out and whatnot.
Yeah.
So they were close. We didn't know at that point if we're going to have to make a run for it, or if we were going to be able to be extracted. There was no place for a helicopter to land. The second Huey Slick picked up the team and the crew from the crashed rescue aircraft. They were able to get them. And now there was a third Slick, a rescue aircraft that came down and was hovering above us. Couldn't land. He was, 15, 20 feet off the ground. They threw out some McGuire ropes for us to get extracted with.
So these are the things you get your legs into them and just hold on and
just hold on. You just hold on. It's a loop like a on the bottom, like a child swing woven into the bottom. But you have to hold on. If you don't hold on, you're gonna invert and fall out. So we're on the ground. Nobody is seriously injured. I mean, we're all hurting. I mean, I was hurting really bad. Our co-pilot, he had a gash in his heel from a 37 millimeter round that came up and hit the underside of the co-pilot's seat. Didn't explode for some unknown reason, probably because it didn't have enough distance to charge itself, to arm itself. But anyway, so all of a sudden, the Special Forces medic that was in the chase ship, he dives out to come down and help. Now, he always claimed that there's no way that he jumped out, that he fell out. He claims he fell out. He said there's nobody in their right mind would go down there. I didn't believe that. I knew he was reacting. I knew the man. I knew he was reacting to his skills. He's a medic. He was going to come help. We didn't need his help. Nobody, but he didn't know that. So anyway, we got into the rigs. Started lifting up out of the area.
You're dangling from a rope, hanging on to it.
Dangling from the rope, hanging on. At this point, I'm hanging on with one hand. I had my M60. I still was carrying that M60 with a length of ammunition. Scott, my partner, he had an M79 grenade launcher that he always liked to use. He had that with one round in the chamber. And before we cleared the bamboo, NVA charged into the clearing below us. Now they're, less than 100 feet below us and shooting straight up on full automatic. I fired off a burst of the M60, only got off, half a dozen rounds before it jammed because I was firing at such a steep angle, it couldn't feed, it jammed. And Scott fired off his M79. Between the two of us, we put down the NVA that had come into the clearing, that initially came into the clearing. We shot them. And then the pilot, again, he was a rookie SOG pilot. It was rookie, first mission.
Wow.
He held steady. He didn't panic. Because it was frequently a pilot, when you're pulling someone up on strings, they start to move before the people hanging clear the trees and end up dragging them to their deaths often. And he didn't panic. The 50 caliber machine gun is shooting at him, and he just held steady and lifted up. We cleared the trees and then slowly left the area. And that started a whole new event and chain of events of miraculous survival. We were shot at the entire distance. I lost, after 10, 15 minutes in the air, I lost the feeling in my left arm and my legs. I mean, we were being shot at constantly by 50 caliber machine guns, the 37 millimeters air bursts all around. I thought that I had taken a hit to the spine because I was just all of a sudden my arm just dropped and I'm hanging on with one hand, and I couldn't feel my legs. I looked down. Crawford, the medic, he tied himself to me to be lifted up.
So he's dangling below you?
Yeah, he's dangling. I mean, just below me. I mean, we're touching.
Yeah.
And he used to tease me and tell me I'm the reason he lost his hearing, that he's deaf in his right ear.
Oh, because you're shooting your M60 right by his head?
Yeah. And I said, well, you're going to complain about losing your hearing when it may have saved your life. He said, well, okay. But anyway, I looked down on him to see if I can see any blood dripping on him, or I'm not seeing any blood anywhere, but my body's hurting. My poor body is hurting. My head is hurting so bad. Little while later, my hand is cramping up, and
Right, because you're at least a few hundred feet in the air holding on by one
now we're
hand,
several thousand feet.
several
We're,
thousand feet in the air holding
we're
on with one hand.
holding on,
And how
and
fast is the helo traveling?
we couldn't travel fast. We were only going about 55 miles an hour. I mean, we couldn't gain any airspeed because of all the drag and the altitude. But we're getting these air bursts, boom, boom, all around. And the 50 caliber, who is, easy within range. I mean, they're just blasting past us. And I'm reaching a point that I can't hang on. I mean, I'm cold. My head is pounding. My poor body is hurting so bad, and I can't let go of the rope to shake my hand. But it was cramping so bad. And then, I said a short prayer, and to the effect of, God, if you choose that I survive this day, I'll never doubt your existence again. I no sooner said those words when I was going to have to, I was going to lose my grip. Crawford would have gone with me. And I felt like this blanket come over me, this warm blanket. All of a sudden, my head's not pounding. My body's not hurting. My arm, I don't feel anything. I mean, I'm gripping. It feels good. I got a good hold on it. There's no aching. And I'm feeling like surreal. I'm watching these air bursts. They're boom, boom, boom. But I'm no longer thinking that we're going to get hit. I'm really comfortable. I'm really, at peace with things. And still had, about 40 minutes or so to go. And we're being shot at. So turns out that I had I thought I was paralyzed, I accepted that. It turned out I had a spinal bruise that within 48 hours, it cleared up, the swelling went down, and feeling came back.
Wow.
So that would be the most memorable
I can imagine
of
why.
the experiences. And to this day, those of us that were involved in the mission, the men that were on the ground, the men back at Mylock that were monitoring the operation, the pilots don't know how we survived. They just cannot explain it. The slick pilot that lifted us out, he told me, I didn't find this out until a couple of years ago when he contacted me. I never knew who it was, but he contacted me. He told me that while he was hovering, before he lifted us up, his low fuel warning light came on, which meant he had 20 minutes of airtime maximum. Now we're an hour away, and he hadn't lifted us up yet. He said, I don't know. He said the alarm went off, the lights went on. He said, I don't know. He said, I don't know how I didn't get hit from that 50 caliber. Now he turned the aircraft so he faced nose into where that machine gun was firing, so that he had a lower profile, smaller profile. Yeah. He said, I've never been able to figure out how the anti-aircraft, when we were making that long trip home, how we didn't get hit. He said, these anti-aircraft, they were shooting down fighter jets, commonly shooting down fighter jets. They were shooting down Cobras. I mean, they were shooting down all types of
And
aircraft.
here
They
you've
had
got a, and here you've got a Huey doing 50 miles an hour.
yeah,
Not
and
you.
we're just barely putting along. Um, he said, how is all this possible? How is it that all these things happen? And for those of us that were involved, to a person, have felt that it had to be some divine intervention. There's no other way to explain it. I mean, so many times we should have lost our lives before we crashed,
Mm.
after we crashed, in the crash. That how come the aircraft didn't explode when we hit? We were already on fire.
So have you wondered then, okay, so I mean, the only thing that makes sense is, I mean, something miraculous, and then
Yeah,
however we want to, miraculous in the generic
right.
sense, miraculous in the
Yeah,
literal sense.
yeah,
So, let's go with this idea then that there was some divine intervention, and that's what explains it. So then has the next question arisen in your mind? So then why? Why was there intervention? What was
yeah.
the, why did that?
Well, I've I've wondered that. That has that and some other things have haunted me my whole most of my life. Um, my wife brought it to my attention a few years ago, not that many years ago. She said, "Why are you always pounding yourself with this question? Why, you know?" She said, take a look at your life today. Take a look that you have two sons. You have three grandkids. Can you picture a world without them? And she said, what other reason do you need for your survival? It's right in your face,
It's right there.
you know.
Wow.
So and that helped explain some survivor's guilt that I had with Dave Eman, asking him to take a flight for me, and he lost his life as a result. Um, that helps explain that. And that part that had plagued me for years, years and years. That survival guilt from that, real bad.
You mentioned Dave Eman. Can you just share that story briefly, the story of
Yeah,
what happens with Dave? Because it
late,
seems
late,
that he had a premonition, it seems that,
yep,
yeah.
late June, I went on R&R. Um, went to Hong Kong. Wanted to go to Australia. Went to Hong. It turned out he sent me to Hong Kong. Anyway, I got back on the 4th of July. I was scheduled. I was on the flight plan to fly that night, and I wasn't. I had just gotten back, and I told my partner at the time, Steve Harper. I said, "Hey, man, I want to take tonight off, and I'll get into it tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow." And I asked my friend Dave Eman if he would take the flight for me just for tonight. And he said, "Yeah, sure, not a problem." Well, a few hours later, um, when they were taking the flight, Steve got up from his bunk. Steve Harper, who was my partner at the time, he got up from his bunk and he said something that never, ever, ever said anything like before. He always told me, he called me Chief. He said, "Chief, never have to worry." He said, "Because as long as you stick with me," he says, "I know that the gook hasn't been born yet that's going to take my life." That was his attitude.
Yeah.
So that night, his bunk was right next to mine. He got up and he looked down at me and he said, "Chief, if I'm going to die, it's going to be on my own aircraft, my own ship." And it just set me back. I mean, he never spoke like that. And then Dave, whose bunk was on the other side of me, he got up, he grabbed his helmet, walked to the doorway of the tent, and he stopped and he turned around and he just looked at me for a moment, and then he something, it just, you know, uncommon, just so uncommon. And he just nodded his head and went. A half hour later, they were both dead. I always wondered what was going through his mind. What was going through Dave's mind? Yeah. What was Harper? Now, you know, interesting, a little side note, the day after I went on R&R, not Dave, but Steve, Harper, and the two pilots, plus one of our staff sergeants who was filling in, got shot down. The flight that I would have been flying, it was the day after I went on. They got shot down. The aircraft was destroyed. The staff sergeant got a broken leg, a high break. He had a cast from his hip. Steve got all cut up, got, you know, and bruises. And the two pilots just got bruises. This night on July 4th, the two pilots and Harper, it's the first time that they flew together since then. And they were killed as well.
I see that behind you, you have your medals in a
Yes.
display there.
Yeah.
Of those, which one means the most to you?
Well, I would say the Distinguished Flying Cross. Not, I received it twice. The second time I received it was for the mission that I just described to you, where we got shot down. I think that in its meaning, not for what I did necessarily, but the results of what I contributed to, so directly, so personally, saved the lives of my friends in a very, very personal way. I mean, they were within moments of being annihilated.